Hey there, friends and running fans. This is Amby Burfoot welcoming you to the latest episode of the podcast, Running State of the Sport.
And this is George Hirsch, your co-host at Running State of the Sport. In every episode, we talk to the smartest, most informed, most influential, and sometimes fastest runners on the planet.
This week, we're talking to one of America's most successful ever marathon runners, Pete Pfitzinger, a two-time qualifier to the Olympic marathon. Pete has been outside the U.S. mainstream for a while now, as he moved to New Zealand in the late 1990s with his wife, Chrissie, a New Zealand Olympian herself.
Pete may be living down under, but his influence is felt around the world due to his bestseller status of his marathon training book, Advanced Marathoning, written with Scott Douglas. We'll be talking with Pete about his personal success in the marathon and also about the most important principles in his book, and now also about his online coaching at pfitzingerscoaching.com. But first, Amby, let's review the biggest news in running. What have you got?
You know, George, I'm always interested in news coming from the big running organizations, the races themselves, like the Boston Marathon and the Comrades Marathon in South Africa. Recently, they were both in the news. The BAA announced that they were going to give 1,000 qualifiers who didn't make the qualifying cut, and everyone listening sort of knows what I mean. They were going to give random entries to 1,000 of those people who didn't quite make it into the race to, I don't know, I guess make them feel a little bit better. But it was a curious decision because a lot of people said, hey, why not just give it to the 1,000 next fastest runners who barely missed your cutoff? And that's a reasonable perspective. And also confusing was the fact that the BAA didn't say, okay, we're letting in 1,000 more runners, but does that mean our field is getting bigger, or are we going to cut 1,000 somewhere else from charity or qualified runners? So it was a half and half kind of promotion, if you ask me. Down in South Africa, the Comrades Marathon is celebrating its 100th running next year, and that's really going to be one of the biggest events of the road running year in 2027. And they have just voted to not go along with the Regional Athletic Federation and indeed the National Athletic Federation in South Africa. So this is a solitary road race pitting itself against federations that are connected to the International Federation. So it'll be interesting how that turf battle comes out. And lastly, there was a curious press release from World Athletics last week. The good news, they approved the world record of Samuel Sawe in the London Marathon and a bunch of other world records. But strangely, they did not approve yet the half marathon world record that Jacob Kiplimo set in Lisbon in March before the London race. This is the same situation Kiplimo ran into a year ago when his Barcelona time was not approved because of so-called technical violations. We don't know what's going on at Lisbon. We don't know what's going on with Kiplimo, but it's kind of weird that his record was not approved along with Sawag. So, George, what have you been paying attention to?
Yeah, and like you, Amby, I'd love to get under the hood of that Kiplimo story, and I'm sure we'll hear more. At the Commonwealth Games, I had my eye on the mile runs, and that's what they were this year, Amby. They switched from the 1,500 to running a mile at the Commonwealth Games, and that's kind of interesting. So good for the mile. It's on its way back, and following Josh Kerr's new fantastic world record after 27 years, he came back in the Commonwealth Games and won a slow tactical race, showing he can win any which way and against some terrific competition. Cameron Myers, the 20-year-old Australian sensation who took silver, and Timothy Chariot, another Olympic medalist who got himself a bronze there. So good for Josh Kerr. And on the women's side, an Australian sweep in the mile led by Abby Caldwell, followed by Jess Hull, and then Claudia Hollingsworth. Pretty impressive for them. And also, I was at the U.S. Championship meet at Icon Stadium here in New York, and I thought it was a good meet, a strong meet, given, of course, that this was what we call an off year, no uh, qualifying for World Championships or an Olympics, and that obviously kept some big names away in Europe and running Diamond League races and decided to pass. But plenty of big names were there, like Noah Lyles winning the 100. And then when he attempted a double in the 200, he pulled up and kind of walked on in. And I hope he's okay. He looked like it was not a serious type of an injury. And then some very close finishes, not in fast races, but very competitive races. One that really got my attention was the men's 10,000, where Woody Kincaid beat out Grant Fisher by less than a second, but only running 30:13. And so, these guys are obviously way better than that, or way faster than that, I should say. And then in the women's 1500, Nikki Hiltz, they ran 4:06.92, not that fast for them, and edging Addie Wiley and Emily McKay just by a lean, but it sure was exciting racing, and that was great. And last, I just want to make a brief mention that a guy you and I have followed through a terrific college career, Haptum Samuel, NCAA cross-country champion at New Mexico. He won Joni's race at the Beach to Beacon last weekend, beating a strong field, running 27:40. So he is now a pro, and he announced himself to the professional ranks in big time fashion. I think, Amby, we're going to have a lot of fun watching him as he progresses. He's still only 22 years of age. So that's kind of it that I've been keeping my eye on.
Thank you, George. I certainly agree about Haptum Samuel. I don't think he's announced that he's going to run a fall marathon, and maybe he won't. But I also wouldn't be surprised if he ended up in one of the top races and was a real contender because he looks that strong. So that's it for our review of the biggest recent news in running. Now let's turn to Pete Pfitzinger, this week's guest on Running, State of the Sport. Pete was a big name in U.S. marathoning several decades ago when he made 2 Olympic teams in the marathon.
He's also written one of the best known and most popular books on marathon training. It's called Advanced Marathon, which was co-authored with Scott Douglas. The book first came out in 2001, 25 years ago, and reached its 4th edition last year.
In the 1990s, Pete moved to New Zealand with his wife, Chrissie, also an Olympian for New Zealand. He then spent many years in several different executive positions overseeing athlete development in New Zealand. Pete, welcome to the podcast, Running State of the Sport. We're really excited to catch up with an old friend.
Thanks, Amby. Thanks, George. Absolutely, old friend. It's just wonderful to be joining you guys today.
So, Pete, let's start out with a brief bio on you, how old you are, where you're living. We already said New Zealand, but get specific, your family situation, your current fitness program, how you're filling the hours of a basically typical day.
Yeah, thanks, George. Well, I'm 69 later this month. My wife, Chrissie, and I live in Auckland, New Zealand, with our daughter, Katrina, and son-in-law, Tyler. Our other daughter, Annika, lives down in Nelson on the South Island. She's a runner. She was 52nd in the World Cross Country Champs 2 years ago. And she's engaged to Julian Matthews, who ran for Providence College and was a Olympian in Rio 2016. So yeah, we're a running family. And Julian and Annika have produced Luca, our 15-month-old grandson, and we're besotted by the
Congrats.
little man. So yeah, that's wonderful. They also put on a running festival down in Nelson called The Spectacle. And they have everything from a 100-mile trail race down to a 5K road race. So they're busy working and running as well. My current fitness includes cycling twice a week, strength training in the gym, trying to keep the bones and the muscles strong, a lot of walking. We have a dog who loves the walking, and I love the walking as well. And yeah, I'll talk a little bit later. Occasionally I do excessive stair climbing. But unfortunately, my right big toe joint keeps me from running. I can't really get up on the front of my foot, so no real running.
Hey,
My typical day.
go ahead.
So yeah. Oh, yeah. I do some work with Paralympics New Zealand and Athletics New Zealand, just a little bit of contract work with them. And yeah, the 4th edition of Advanced Marathoning came out last year. And right now I'm working with Phil Latter and Human Kinetics on the 2nd edition of Faster Road Racing, which is very similar to Advanced Marathoning, except it covers 5K to the half marathon range. And yeah, I'll probably talk a little bit later about the new website. So this PfitzingerCoaching.com website and selling training plans online, but we'll hold on to that till later. So yeah, that's me.
Pete, you won't be surprised that I'm a little interested in the book writing part of your career. And particularly, why in the world would anybody title a book Advanced Marathoning when we all know that 95% of the marathoners are mid packers or maybe behind the mid pack? You could have called it Easy Marathoning. Did you pick that title deliberately, and what was the reason?
Yeah, well, one answer is 5% of a big number is still a pretty good size number, right? So
Oh, a
yeah, and we're
mathematician
proud.
among us.
But yeah, I say blame Scott Douglas. So we wrote our first book together, Road Racing for Serious Runners. So we had the word serious in there, which is also, kind of focused. That was in 1998. And back then I had a column in Running Times magazine called the Pfitzinger Lab Report, and it had a pretty good following. Among committed runners, they already had a good degree of knowledge, and you could write to them write for them in a little bit more advanced way. And so from that first book, Scott and I came to the conclusion, we got a lot of feedback. Well, what people really associate me with and want to know more about was the marathon. So that's why we came up with that first book. Now the name, that's possibly limiting. If I could go back in time, we might come up with something a little bit different. The book is for committed runners. There were lots of great books out there for, first timers, finish your first marathon, that sort of thing. So we didn't need to write about that. But yeah, we could have found a different way to describe that our books for, committed, experienced, not necessarily advanced marathoners.
So, Pete, what are the themes behind advanced marathon running? In other words, your marathon training philosophy, if you will. Give it to us kind of in an elevator pitch or an executive summary.
Well, the book tries to explain the why behind training. So there's basically the first half of the book is explaining physiology, nutrition, supplementary training, recovery, trying to do it in a way that's at the right level for this audience. So not too basic, not too sciencey, technical. The training plans try to make the most effective use of the reader's limited time, right? So our readers are committed marathoners, but they have full-time jobs, right? So we have to treat their limited training time as precious. And yeah, I think we're really, they're the main things, trying to help them to understand the why and to use their time as effectively as possible.
So, despite the slightly limiting title, I think the book has been a really big success in the marathon world. 4 editions, and every time you go on an internet forum and say, "Hey, what book should I read, or what training philosophy should I follow?" Pete Pfitzinger comes up very, very close to the top, if not at the top. What kind of feedback do you get from readers? What have they appreciated most about the book?
Yeah, well, we definitely have some devoted fans, which is wonderful. Um, I mean, most of our readers are dedicated runners. They've already run at least a couple of marathons. They want to improve. Um, they're they train hard. They're happy to train hard. So we don't look for the simplest, we try to keep it simple, but we don't look for the to make it super easy. Like, hey, if there's long runs required, well, we've got the long runs in those plans. Because there are so many other books for the beginners, or focus more on doing it at a somewhat lower level. I think these readers appreciate that this book's targeted for them. It's definitely not elites, but it's also definitely not beginners.
So, Pete, you've gotten into your fourth edition, which is really quite something. Tell us a couple of the things that you know you've done in updating the book through the years as you've gotten to this fourth edition, and how does it reflect changes, within the marathon itself?
Yeah, thanks, George. In talking over with Scott, we came to the conclusion that this fourth edition has more substantial updates than the second or third did, because there's been so much happening in the world of running in the last, say 6 to 8 years. So part of that is reading as many scientific studies as possible, trying to understand what's real and what's, a little blip. Um, Reading what coaches are saying, reading what elite runners are saying, trying to take all that information and really, what are the new things? What are the ways to describe things differently? What are the ways to fine tune the plan? So, I mean, each edition has updated discussions of lactate threshold training, running economy. That's always evolving, but at a sort of a steady basis. I think we do a better job this time of explaining why we recommend long runs at a faster pace than most other coaches and writers do, and also why we explain, or why we recommend uh, almost all long runs to have a progressive nature. I mean, if it's a recovery, you're just getting the miles, it's different. But for most long runs, we're saying, hey, start at about 20% slower than marathon pace and finish at about 10% slower than marathon pace, which is, that's a good purposeful effort. It's not just time on the feet. Um, each edition, the use of technology changes a lot. So who would have thought in 2001 we'd be in the world we are now? So we discuss monitoring training, but we also try to balance that with, hey, don't tie yourself in knots monitoring every possible thing. And I know there are definitely runners who are doing that. They get too tied up in the monitoring, and they lose the joy of running, right? And you guys are definitely proponents of the long time joy of running. We obviously talked about super shoes, and the way we talked about in the third edition was, there's this new thing. Now we talk about them. Well, okay, how do you use them in training? How much should you use them in training? How do you get the right super shoe for you? Because each model, there's differences between models. Hydrogels, last time we're like, there's this thing emerging. This time, hydrogels, they're out there. And, a lot of people are using them. And you know what? There's recent evidence that taking in more carbohydrate during the race is a real benefit. And don't leave that to race day. Practice that in advance so you're good at it. And there's this thing about, training the gut. So you can handle more by trying that more, in training and say in some other races before your big marathon. One aspect is we've really looked for clusters of days too hard in a row, where there were too much work in too short a time period. And that was based partly on runner feedback. So sometimes someone writes to me and says, hey, tomorrow's Wednesday and I've got this and I can't fit it in, or I'm too tired. And I must admit, I don't always get to that like the next day to give them the feedback right away. But we really went systematically after where is there too much work? Where is there not enough recovery? And, you would have thought we'd clean that up previously. And I don't think it was too bad, but I think now it's really better. So we're not hitting people with 3 days, fairly hard, or 2 hard days and 1 moderate day, or, hey, somehow we spilled over from the end of 1 week that was really hard, and on Tuesday they're doing something of the following week that's a fairly difficult workout as well. So I'm confident that the training plans this time have more recovery, and that should be good for performance as well. I could say a lot of other stuff, but yeah, that's probably enough.
That's terrific. I'm glad there's more recovery for us guys who are looking for easier marathon training plans. Pete, here's a question we didn't exactly expect to ask you, but you just brought it up, and I'm not going to ask you what's the best super shoe or what's the best gel or those kind of impossible questions. But you mentioned lactate threshold training, and that's one of those areas that is just eternally confusing because some people say a lactate threshold run should be, I don't know, 3 or 4 miles, and some people seem to go on for days on their lactate threshold runs. I don't know how they do it.
Yeah.
I think Ryan Hall, I wasn't expecting to mention him, kind of cooked himself by overtraining those runs sometime. But what's your prescription for lactate threshold?
Yeah, well, I can still remember, meeting the late, great Jack Daniels at an Olympic development camp, and him explaining all this to me for the first time in about, I don't know, 1983 or whenever that was. And, the concept hasn't changed. Lactate threshold is a little for somebody who's well trained in the marathon. Lactate threshold is a few percent faster than marathon pace. It's often described as the pace you could hold for an hour. I think it's often the pace you can hold just for, say, 45 minutes to an hour, something like that. An hour for elites, maybe, a little bit less for some others. And you can do it all in one hit. So, you can go do tempo runs of 6 miles, some occasionally 8 miles. But you can also break it up. And I think as I've mellowed, maybe, as I've seen what others are doing, I've gone from, it must be a tempo run to, it's brilliant if you're accumulating it in the workout. So if you're accumulating that distance across several segments, they might be 6-minute long segments. They might be, 10-minute long segments. I know different coaches, advocate for different elements. But yeah, that's what it is to me, Amby.
So, Pete, let's go back to your earlier running days and tell us a little about your best performances in high school, which I think was in Pittsford, New York, which I guess is near Rochester.
That's right.
Okay, and then in college at Cornell, was it evident to others that you were going to be a 2-time Olympic marathoner at that point?
Well, in 9th grade, I was the second best 9th grade 2-miler on the team, and I was pretty happy with that. So that was cool. Yeah, I improved a lot with training. So there was some, initial talent, but if I'd say the differentiator was the more I trained, the better I got. And probably, all runners who are successful have that. But what a great thing, what a great thing to find something that if you apply yourself to it, you get better at it. We had a great high school track team. There were about 100 guys on the team. My coach, Tom Cole, is still a close friend. He was a great motivator. You knew your job was to go earn this many points for the team in the dual meets and in the county championships, et cetera. Yeah. And importantly, my coach was also the wrestling coach. And he said, Pete, you're scrawny. You should do wrestling in the winter. And so I did. I did that for 2 years, and I was terrible at it. But it was great core training, great overall strength training. And after getting tossed around the mat all winter, there was nothing you wanted to do in the spring more than go out and win something. So, yeah, thanks, Coach, for talking me into joining the wrestling team.
And how good did you get at Cornell?
Well, yeah, so just to wrap up high school, I ran 9:18 for 2 miles, and I was fourth in the New York State track champs and third in the first federation meet down at Van Cortlandt Park. So that was high school. Then at Cornell, I won the it was the HEPS. So somehow HEPS, which is 7, was a 10-team competition. The 8 Ivy League teams plus West Point and Annapolis academies. And I won the 10,000 as a sophomore, strangely. And then as a junior, I was second behind the great Kurt Alitz and ran 29:25 and qualified for the NCAA champs in doing that. I also won an indoor HEPS title in the 3 mile. So I was, good in that league, I guess. And that 29:25 as I must have been 20. That was my level. I was running 60 to 70 miles a week. And as I've discovered from talking to the Princeton guys and now Bob Bickle at Bucknell, they're running 100 miles a week. That was preposterous. Whoever thought that there was such a thing as double runs? We didn't know about that. But then my senior year, cross country started great. I set the Cornell course record. I was 6th in the IC4A, the Eastern U.S. cross country university champs. And then I got mono, and it hung around, and I got my tonsils out and really missed the rest of my senior year. So senior year was a big disappointment.
So, Pete, I'm not going to dismiss your collegiate career entirely, but we expect our future Olympians to have racked up a couple of NCAA championships while they're in college and the track and cross country and stuff like that. And that wasn't you. So what happened after graduation? What were you doing the next 3 or 4 years before you made that big breakthrough that we'll talk about at the 84 marathon trials?
Yeah, well, the big step was about a week after graduation. I drove to Boston, 6 hours, and needed a place to live. And I walked into the Bill Rogers Running Center in Cleveland Circle, and Dave Ozerski was behind the cash register and said, "Look, I'm this runner. I'm moving to Boston for the summer. I need a place to live." And Dave said, "You're joking." And I thought that meant I was the 10th guy who'd done that today. But he said, "Look, I live upstairs, and we just had somebody move out." So in no time at all, I was living over the Bill Rogers Running Center, which you could say was Mecca in terms of running knowledge, and doing some training with Bob Hodge and Greg Meyer and sometimes Bill himself. And I'd go down to the store, and there's Patty at the time, Patty Lyons, and there's Bob 70, and Joni would stop by, and it was unbelievable. So I did some training with those guys, trained a lot with Tom Dudarian, some with Dick Mahoney, Bill Roach, a whole bunch of other knowledgeable people. And my mileage increased that summer from 70 to 80 to 90. I think I touched on 100 miles. The next year, I got third in the Cascade Runoff, and I got third in the Peachtree Road Race. So there was this latent ability that was spurred on by increased mileage and, better training overall that I just absorbed that summer. Also had some time with Coach Squires, and, Coach Squires really would get a cocktail napkin at the Elliott Lounge and scribble something on it, and that would be brilliant. And you'd go do that.
So let's get on to the 1984 marathon trials. We had some pretty big names in there: Alberto Salazar, Greg Myers, Bill Rogers, my goodness, and a number of other really fast Americans who'd been running really well. And it's probably safe to say that no one was picking you to win the thing. yet you grabbed the lead at halfway mark, built a substantial lead over the next 10 miles. Seems kind of crazy, really. And tell us what the plan was, what was going through your head. Just kind of bring that back to us, the 84 trials.
All right. No, thanks, George. Of course, there's nothing I'd, enjoy more than doing that. If I can provide a little bit of context. So, I ran my first marathon in 1980. And I actually won the National Sports Festival and beat Benji Durden, in 81 in July. And then in September was the Nike OTC Marathon in Eugene, which had prize money. And Benji was no fool because he was first in that and I was third, but I ran 2:12. So I ran 2:12 in 1981. 82, I had plantar fascia surgery. 83, I came back and ran 3 marathons. So I won the San Francisco Marathon, tough course, 2:14. I finished second in the Montreal Marathon to Khabib Balsha, the great Ethiopian runner, ran 2:12. And then I won a marathon in Auckland, New Zealand, also in 2:12. And that one was really a vehicle to get down to New Zealand to train for the Olympic trials. And Kevin Ryan, who's a New Zealand runner who worked with me at New Balance, he was coaching me. We were training together and he was coaching me at that time. He said, Pete, get out of the northern winter, go down to New Zealand, just focus on training. So I cranked up my miles to 140. I actually averaged 143 miles for 10 weeks in a row. Don't try this at home. January, February into March of 1984. Came home much stronger. Was back in Boston, living with a group of runners, and Tom Ratcliffe was my main training partner, and we trained the house down leading into the trials. The plan on the day was to run a personal best. So at that point, I'd run 2:12 3 times, and to make the team. And it wasn't to win the trials, but I thought, there's a way to make this team. And at halfway, we were just under 106. And I thought, well, that's not going to do it. And there are about 15 of us together. I mean, there's still photos floating around of that day. And so I moved to the front of the pack, hoping to just get it down a little bit. If we could get it down to 8, well, that's a much better chance of making a team where there's 8 than when there were about 15. And the next thing I knew, I had a 5-second lead and then a 10-second lead, because I guess Greg was looking at Tony Sandoval and Tony was looking at Greg, and Alberto was, they were all looking at each other. And as you say, nobody was too worried about Pete Pfitzinger. So that was cool because my lead increased to 30 seconds. So what was initially not a commitment, once I was out there, 5 or 10 seconds, it was, well, okay, yeah, let's pick it up and maybe we will whittle it down to a small pack. So had a 30-second lead at about 22 miles. Alberto and John Tuttle put the hammer down and they caught me at 25. And if you watch the coverage of that, I see John. I look over and see John first. And, we grew up near, he's also from outside Rochester. So he wasn't that intimidating. That's John Tuttle. I knew him in high school. And then I look again and there's Alberto. And I won't say online what I said to myself, but it was like, there's Alberto. And who else might be there? Because I knew don't look back. And I didn't know how close other guys were, except some of my Cornell teammates were along the course. And they're saying, one guy in particular said, hey, they're catching you. It's like, oh, okay. So I hung with Alberto and John as best I could. And then John dropped back at about 25 and a half miles. I think he looked back. He saw he was safe on the team and he was tired because he just ran a very hard 3 miles. And he dropped back and all of a sudden I was in second. And, there's 400, 500 meters to go and I could see Alberto up ahead. I thought, well, okay, let's give it a go. And I still didn't know, was there someone else who was going to go by me and or 2 people and nudge me into fourth. So just revved it up, was fortunate to pass Alberto, with about 20 meters to go. And yeah, it worked. Hooray.
So, of course, the question is, what did that feel like when you hit the line and then, the emotions afterwards?
Oh, it was incredible. It was, at the end of the marathon, you're being emotional anyhow. You're exhausted. The trials was a big deal. My family was there. We had a van full from my high school because I grew up an hour and a half away. Lots of guys from Cornell. The guys I lived with in Boston, some of them had been apparently doing a little pre-celebration in Boston, and they decided at midnight we're driving to Buffalo. And I'm sure there was a designated driver, but they got to Buffalo in time for the start. And they got over the bridge into Canada. So I had all these people running along. So, wonderful support, emotional to make the team, strangely to have won it. Alberto didn't know who I was. And that's, that was pretty cool.
Really?
Yeah.
So then,
George, let me just say one thing. I'm not sure we told our listeners that this race was, in fact, Pete, correct me, started in Buffalo in the U.S., crossed, what's it called, the Peace Bridge into Canada, Niagara Falls, and it's actually finished in Canada, Niagara Falls. Is that right?
Yeah, I think we had to show identification to pick up our numbers the day before.
Right.
And at 4 miles, we crossed the bridge. And I can remember somebody, one of the guys next to me, he brought a quarter because there's a toll booth, and he threw his quarter into the little toll booth thing as we went by. So then we were, 22 miles in Canada.
Well, it's got to be something. Just going back and thinking of those, I want to go on to your next Olympic trials. That would have been 88, New Jersey waterfront, and I'd love to just get your take on how that one came out. This was not the same, but it's always something when you're battling for third and trying to avoid fourth place. So give us the highlights.
Yeah, thanks, George. Yeah, well, I had some ups and downs in 85 and 86. And then I finished third in New York City in 87 and ran 2:11:54. So I was back, at what I considered my best. And New York's not an easy course, so I was really pleased with that. The course for 88, it was a fairly tough course, up and down, but the main thing was a very windy day, and so you had to run intelligently in relationship to the wind. And there are about 10 or 12 of us together at about 17 or 18 miles, and we were running at a good pace, but not remarkable. It hadn't really heated up. And then Mark Conover, and I'll say, well, who was Mark Conover? And rest in peace, Mark. But he was incredible on that day. So he and Ed Eyestone, they took off about 17 or 18 miles, and 6 guys got away. And I was in a group of about 3 or 4, sort of 7th to 9th or 10th, and watching this group of 6 pull away and thinking, oh, this is a disaster. And we had crosswinds, not headwinds, but crosswinds. I got to where I was by myself in 7th, and they were no longer pulling away. I was holding them. And so, that's probably at 20, 21 miles. And it was the toughest thing mentally I ever experienced in running is you got to be top 3. There's these guys together. They're running together. It's windy. And it was just a matter of keeping the faith. So I was sure that not all 6 felt equally good, and it would eventually break up. And hopefully there'd be an opportunity, to be top 3. And it did. So it went into 3 groups of 2. And then even 5th and 6th separated a little bit. So I think the first person I passed might have been Steve Spence. And I passed Steve Spence. I passed Mark Gompers. Paul Gompers, sorry. I passed Mark Kerp, and thought, oh, this is good. I think I can get top 3 here. And then Paul Gompers, so I know you interviewed, and I listened to your podcast with him. he comes flying back and he repasses me. It's like, what are you doing? It's 23 miles. You don't do that 23 miles. And but he and I were third and fourth, and we're duking it out, and it's windy, and you do a turn, you turn 90 degrees, and you go from crosswind to headwind, and then back to crosswind, and at about 24, I got away from Paul, and so then I was just a matter of running the last 2 miles steadily, not blowing up, and I was going to be on the team. So it was Mark Conover, then Ed Eyestone, then myself. I wasn't near those guys up ahead. But I did end up comfortably ahead of Paul.
In both of your Olympics, you were actually the first American finisher in the Olympic marathon. Not podium positions, but we know how tough the Olympics are. I think maybe you were 11th and 14th, Los Angeles and Seoul. But the question is, what was that Olympic experience like for you? Or was there anything special about either of those races? Or what can you tell us about the Olympics?
Yeah, well, it's a big responsibility to represent your country. There's 3 slots, and there were so many good guys at home. There were guys who I had enormous respect for, like Greg Meyer, like Tony Sandoval, even, Dan Schlesinger. So Dan Schlesinger was a wonderful marathoner. He'd run 2:11 in New York, and he was injured on the day. Ron Tabb wasn't there. Dick Beardsley wasn't there. So, when you're on that team, you have a responsibility to those guys. You have a responsibility to the history, Frank Shorter, and the wonderful U.S. tradition in the marathon. And then to your, you're representing your family, you're representing your training partners, your college, your hometown. So, yeah, I think you absolutely want to do your very best. And in neither case did I run as well in the Olympics as I had in the trials. But I did absolutely as well as I could, on that day. So I left nothing back. It just, I wasn't quite as well prepared, I guess, for the Olympic races as I had been for the trials races.
Pete, your fastest marathon time, if I've got this right, I think was 2:11:43, which was back in the 84 trials. And yet there were other Americans in your period. You mentioned a number of them just now, Dickie Beardsley, Greg Meyer, and so on. These were 2:09 guys. And yet, when it came to these big races, they couldn't beat you in head-to-head competitions like, Olympic marathon trials. What was it? What was your special talent in the marathon that caused that?
Yeah. Well, I guess one element was really preparing for those trials races. So devoting, the right amount of time, getting the training right. There's always an element of luck. So, the great Ron Tabb had been running wonderfully and was injured, right? So there were different guys who weren't at their best on trials day for one reason or another. But my strength was really my strength in the second half of the race. I was good in warm conditions or warm and humid conditions. I was good on hilly courses. So, a hot, hilly 30-miler would have been cool. I would have been like, yeah, bring it on. I wasn't as fast, I suppose. A lot of guys had better 10K personal bests than I did. I ran 28:41, but, some guys were sub 28. So, yeah, I think that's about it.
So, Pete, you had a pretty good number of years of real top flight marathon running. During those years, tell us what was maybe the most important thing you learned about marathon training and racing.
Yeah, well, preparing thoroughly is important. A thing I wish I'd understood better earlier was, if you feel yourself getting sick or you feel a little injury coming on, to back off. We were still of that mentality of run through stuff and running through yeah, usually wasn't a good idea in hindsight. But I did gradually learn that prepare thoroughly and be patient. Be patient in your training. Not every day is going to be your best day, and be patient in the races as well. So back yourself that you've got the strength to do the right things in the second half.
Pete, when and how, and I guess even why did your competitive marathon running come to an end? And then what did you go on to do after that?
Yeah, well, my last marathon was actually the Seoul Olympics in 1988. My body wasn't holding up well to the training. I could tell there wasn't a personal best left in me. I was just kind of rattling my body to bits. Right after Seoul, I started back working full-time at New Balance. So I'd worked for New Balance before 84, ran for them during that 4 years, and then was back working for them full-time afterwards. And then in 1997, I completed a master's degree at the University of Massachusetts in exercise physiology. And, that was a real interest of mine. I wanted to know more about it. UMass was a great place for running physiology and running biomechanics, for that matter. And then Chrissie and I moved to New Zealand late in 97, and we've been here ever since.
So your New Zealand career is interesting to me, Pete, because in marathoning, we think of that as the pure individual sport. You can be as good as you want to be. You can train 140 miles a week, as you did for the trials. But not many marathoners are psychologically suited, perhaps, to then go into, I don't know if I want to call it bureaucratic, administrative, political, sports management, as you did. How did that happen? What were the challenges? What were the rewards of it?
Yeah, well, my timing worked out really well. So New Zealand, which had a proud history of Olympic running and distance running, was falling behind, particularly in Olympic sports. So the low was really the 2000 Olympics in Sydney, where New Zealand only won 4 medals. And the government started to put some support into Olympic and Paralympic sport, and a new system was developed. And I was part of that. And I had the administrative background, with the MBA, and I had the physiology background as well. So I was able to work in both of those worlds and be part of a system where, New Zealand won 20 Olympic medals, tiny country of 5 million, won 20 Olympic medals in both Tokyo 2020 Olympics and the Paris 2024 Olympics. And that tends to be across a range of somewhat similar sports where there's a endurance component and a technical coaching component. So cycling, rowing, canoe racing, track and field, and a couple of others. And so really you can trace a lot of that back to Arthur Lydiard and the big aerobic base. So New Zealand's current success does in a lot of ways tie back, to that time period and that early success in middle distance and distance running.
You talked about the great Olympic successes of New Zealanders, and we know certainly back in the day, before the dominance of Eastern Africans, the Peter Snells and Rod Dixons and Alison Rowe, Lorraine Mollers. There's a lot of big names in New Zealand running. And you've been involved in the sport there. Nowadays, obviously, it's quite different. How do you keep the athletes motivated today?
Yeah, well, while New Zealand's having, the increasing success across Olympic sports, it's gotten tougher and tougher in the sport of track and field and, in long distance and marathon running. So I think New Zealand's advantage was the coaching from the 60s and the 70s. So Arthur Lydiard, also Arch Jelly, who is just, by the way, turning 104 on the 13th of August. So Arch, a wonderful man, still 100% sharp as he's ever been. And we're going to his birthday party next Sunday.
Good.
But it's a lot of the New Zealand runners go to college in the U.S. now. And so, 2 years ago, Maya Ramsden and Kimberly May finished first and second in the NCAA women's 1500 meters. So 2 Kiwis, first and second, showing some real potential. The more recent success, Nick Willis, not super recent, but 2 Olympic medals in the 1500 meters.
For sure.
What a wonderful thing. And he ran from Michigan. Jordy Beamish last year won the world championships in the steeplechase. You all saw him got spiked in the head in the heats, and then he comes back and he wins by like 100th of a second in the final. And he ran from Northern Arizona. So, it's finding those right opportunities. And, Sam Ruth, so 16-year-old, coached by Craig Kirkwood, runs a 3:48 mile at age 16. And so there's potential there. But the thing is, around the world, it's so competitive now. There's good coaching. There's well-trained athletes from more countries. There's more solid development programs. So New Zealand's share of the medals is smaller than it used to be, and each one gets tougher and tougher.
Well, certainly the mile event, 1500 meters, and the marathon event are just on fire these days, and it's been exciting to see New Zealand and some other countries re-enter the scene in the 1500 and the mile, and some people are getting closer in the marathon as well. But switching back to personal questions, I don't know a lot of the details, Pete, but I know you've been dealing with a cancer for several years. Could you tell us a little bit about that? I also know that you have a running charity organization that raises funds against cancer, and even that you were involved in a big effort this weekend. So tell us about that too, if you would.
Yeah, thanks, Amby. Yeah, so in 2023, I was diagnosed with myeloma, which is also known as multiple myeloma. It's a form of blood cancer. I think people know leukemia and lymphoma. Other blood cancers are more well known. But, I just went in for my normal annual medical checkup, and my doctor did some blood tests that weren't quite right. So we did some more. And I guess my message to everyone is get an annual medical checkup, because this was nothing particularly special. I had no symptoms. Most people do have some symptoms, but I had none. So, get that checkup, because if something's going on, you really want to know about it and get it treated earlier rather than later. So that's my public service message is, get checked. The first year was some pretty tough treatment. So I had what's called a autologous stem cell transplant, where they take your own stem cells out, you get strong chemotherapy, then they put your stem cells back in. And during that time, your immune system's wiped out, the lining of your intestines goes away, you lose your hair, but then you come back, and it's not the myeloma way back. So right now, I'm just on one medication, and I feel pretty good. So it's not cured, but it is knocked way back. So this the stair climb. So the Sky Tower in Auckland is the tallest building in New Zealand. And the charity Blood Cancer New Zealand has a Sky Tower run up each year. Run is possibly an exaggeration. And it's 1,103 steps. So I suppose I shuffle up. And my team, Defeat Myeloma, we raised 41,000 New Zealand dollars for Blood Cancer New Zealand. And we all made it to the top. And I was 3 seconds slower than last year. So I've done it twice now. And I think this year was a high gravity day, if there's such a thing, because it felt harder than last year. But I'm sore today from my feet all the way through my shoulders because you do use the handrails a bit, but also just delighted to be healthy enough to do it, and also that we raised $41,000.
Pete, we really wish you well with the multiple myeloma, and I know there have been a lot of advances made with that disease. So I hope that it's just another, another nice long life ahead for you, and there's no reason it shouldn't be. We usually wrap up the podcast with a couple of questions for all of our guests, and the first is, what's the state of the sport from your vantage point? What you consider good, and what might need some fixing.
Yeah, well, overall, I think it's really, really good. So, the level of participation's way up. So you'll know better than I do, but it's something like 50 million people in the U.S. are running, people running around the world. The number of local run clubs is fantastic. So it's a, grassroots phenomenon. Bob Bickle's podcast, he was talking about the sheer number of races. So I think he said 6% of the competitors are in the 100 largest races. So 94% are in regional and smaller races. I mean, that's a healthy sport, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The amount of information out there is incredible. But there's also, can be confusing. So, I have to laugh every day. I see, well, here's the 8 core exercises you must do that one place says, and other places says, here's the 12 you must do. And you could spend all day, every day, just doing all the must-do exercises. So that feels, I don't know, there could be some consolidation. And I guess a question is whether AI is going to be helpful for that or not. I have no idea, but I was interested in what Bob Bickle had to say on your podcast, and also what Paul Gompers had to say as well about, what AI might bring to our sport. On the, I guess a negative is there's still a lot of drug infractions in our sport. There's currently over 600 athletes sanctioned by the Athletics Integrity Unit. I mean, that's long distance running and track and field. There's 162 from India, which I think is probably more track and field, but there's 148 from Kenya, which is mostly, middle and long distance running. And I guess for every athlete who gets caught, there's probably others who haven't been caught. So yeah, that's, that compromises people's confidence in the results of the big races. So I hope that can improve in the near future.
Dude, it sounds like you've discovered this thing called the internet, where everything you read is the absolute final truth on all subjects. But I did want to give you a moment to talk about your own new introduction into the internet. I think you're doing some online coaching. Tell us a little bit about that and where you're hoping to take that.
Yeah, thanks, Amby. Well, one, it's really exciting to be doing something new in running. So I've run for a long time, coached for a long time, written books for a long time, but I'd never done the online, provided online training plans. And yeah, that was really sparked, I guess, about a year ago when Greg McMillan visited and said, "Hey, Pete, why don't you do this?" And it's like, well, it seemed really complicated. And he was really helpful in demystifying it and helping me to understand the mechanics behind it. So I have a website, pfitzingercoaching.com, that my daughter Annika has developed. Thanks, Annika. And I'm selling training plans via Final Surge, marathon and half marathon only. There's 5 levels from beginners up to high mileage. I'm learning a lot. It's a great journey, I guess, to keep understanding how to do this better and better. And I am looking at providing, personal one-on-one coaching, but a small number. It'll be, 8 to 10 athletes or 8 to 10 marathoners only. That'll that'll start towards the end of this year.
And we will link to the to your online coaching site in our show notes for this episode.
Thanks, Andy. I appreciate
And
that.
then, Pete, I told you there's two questions, and so the
Oh,
final
yes.
one
Yeah.
we're going to end with is we call it our three fairy godmother wishes, and we give you three and only three, and these are wishes however you you want to spread them out: family, friends, the sport, you name it. Three wishes you've got. Go for it.
Thank you. Well, the first one's a cure for myeloma, right? So that's for myself, but for all the other people out there around the world with myeloma, it's getting closer. But instead of 10 years, wouldn't that be great if it was 2 years away? A second wish. So we have this grandson, Luca. He's fantastic. They're actually coming to visit later today, and we couldn't be more excited. So watching him grow up, and hey, daughters, Annika and Katrina, some more grandchildren, that would be super. No pressure. And the third one, I think it's for runners to keep it simple and just enjoy their running. So, running can get too complex, too technical, but if you think back to why you got into running and what it's really all about, you're out there, whether it's a sunny day, you're fighting the elements, you're flowing along and just simply enjoying the act of running. They're my three.
And that's it for this week's podcast with marathon great and book author Pete Pfitzinger, now online training coach. Pete, on behalf of both George and myself, thanks for joining us. It's been fun. It's great to chat with you again after all these years. A real treat and a real honor. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Amby and George. I mean, you're both legends in the sport, and it's wonderful to be way over here in Auckland, New Zealand, and talking to two wonderful old friends. So thank you for the opportunity.
Amby, you and I haven't talked with Pete Pfitzinger in a long time, and given his full-time life down in New Zealand, it brought back some real memories when he was absolutely one of the top guys on the marathon circuit back in the day, and he was one of the smartest, toughest runners around, and he knew how to prepare for those all-important races like Olympic marathon trials and the Olympic Games themselves. So what did you take away from our conversation with Pete?
George, as you might imagine, I enjoyed joking with him a little bit about the book writing, particularly the title of his book, Advanced Marathoning. I said that was a terrible title and what the heck was he doing? And he had a great answer, which was, not every book has to be for every runner. And he's absolutely true. He's right. Sometimes it's really smart to narrow your focus and hit it out of the park when you do. And that's what he and Scott Douglas did with advanced marathoning. And that's why it's now in its fourth printing and still followed by so many. I was particularly impressed also when he talked about the responsibility he felt when running for the U.S. in the Olympic marathons. He noted, of course, that he wanted to run well for the whole country who was watching on TV, but he also said he felt a particular responsibility to those runners who he had beaten in the marathon trials. And these are guys like Greg Myers and Tony Sandoval and Paul Gompers and others who would have given an arm and a leg and a more to be in those Olympics. I'm not sure I've ever heard anyone say exactly this that Pete said, and it struck me as a great perspective and also a big personal motivator for him when he was there in those Olympics. George, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, Amby. Pete had a good running career at Cornell, but not one that I would say would have indicated that he would have been a two-time Olympic marathoner. And I think, the breakthrough really seemed to come. He graduated and he moved to Boston and he got in with a pretty good little running group. Bill Rogers and Greg Meyer and Bobby Hodge and the guys like that who were running, at a high level and feeding off each other. And he increased his mileage, and it was a recipe for success, and it just worked. And these were guys that I think at the beginning were somewhat of a different league, and he began to feel, he could run with them, and sooner or later he was even beating some of them, some of the time and in some of the biggest races. And so I think there was a real lesson in that one. And then at the end, Amby, we always ask our three fairy godmother wishes. And his, of course, were very close to my heart. As you know, each of them were a cure for multiple myeloma, one that I feel very strongly about. And then he talked about watching his grandson grow, and again, grandchildren, such a huge part of my life, and I can only relate to that one. And then I just like the way he said, and for runners, keep the sport simple and keep the pure joy of running. And I just endorse all of those. I just liked it. It was great visiting again with Pete. I think it was the first time I think we've talked to him in a long time, and just it was a wonderful conversation.
And I think so many runners benefit when they follow the Pete Pfitzinger message of keep it simple, which doesn't mean that you don't train hard, because he was up to 140 miles a week. Obviously, you do train very hard, but simple is often a better course than branching out in an infinite number of directions and kind of losing control of the big picture. So thank you, George. And that's it for this week's episode of Running State of the Sport. We hope you enjoyed joining us as much as we enjoyed sharing the time with you. We'll be back again soon with another episode. Until then, please tell your friends about Running State of the Sport. We'd also appreciate a review at your favorite podcast host, like Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. In signing off, here's our hope for the state of your own personal running. Chin up, clear eyes, full heart, keep moving, onward